USS Ingraham, DD-444, was escorting a convoy off the coast of Nova Scotia on 22 August 1942 when she was called to investigate the USS Buck, DD-420, which had suffered a collision with a merchant vessel. Ingraham proceeded through in heavy fog and low visibility when suddenly the oil tanker USS Kemung appeared out of the thick fog. The two ships collided, causing severe damage to the Ingraham, which began to sink immediately. As the ship went down, her depth charges exploded, killing several men trying to escape the sinking ship. Only 11 men survived on a lifeboat for more than 36 hours before being rescued. USS Bristol, DD-453, was escorting a convoy to Iran on 13 October 1943, when at 4:30 the ship was hit by a torpedo on her portside in her forward engine room, breaking her in two halves. The stern sank first, shortly followed by the bow within 12 minutes. 52 men went down with the Bristol. USS Hambleton, DD-455, was participating in the Operation Torch landings, when on the evening of 11 November 1942, the ship was hit by a torpedo from German submarine U-173 on her portside amidships. The ship's crew fought to correct the 12-degree list to starboard by shoring up bulkheads and jettisoning heavy topside weight. The Hambleton was towed to Casablanca, where the ship was cut in half and reconnected with 40 feet of the ship's hull removed. The ship made for Boston to have permanent repairs done. On her way home, the crew got revenge by sinking the U-boat believed to have torpedoed her. USS Rodman, DD-456, was escorting a minesweeper unit off Okinawa on 6 April 1945, when at 15:15, a large flight of 50 to 75 enemy planes flew overhead. One of the planes dove on the Rodman and crashed into her port bow. The kamikaze's bomb exploded under the ship, and two more suicide planes struck the ship during the attack, but luckily, Rodman's crew kept her from sinking. The ship was towed to Karamaretto, then sent back stateside for the remainder of the war. She lost 16 men killed and another 20 seriously wounded. USS Emmons, DD-457, was escorting a minesweeper unit off Okinawa on 6 April 1945, when at 15:15, a large flight of 50 to 75 enemy planes attacked the American ships. Emmons was coming to the assistance of USS Rodman when she was targeted by multiple kamikazes. After shooting down 6, she was hit nearly instantaneously by 5 suicide planes in a well-coordinated attack. The first hit the fantail, the second on the starboard side of the pilot house, the third struck the portside of the Combat Information Center, the fourth hit the number 3 5-inch gun, and the fifth hit the starboard side at the waterline. Men began to abandon ship before the last plane even hit, as the Emmons had become a blazing inferno. After a fruitless attempt to put the fires out, all men abandoned ship by 1800, just a couple hours after the deadly strike. The hulk of Emmons exploded at 1930 and was scuttled the next day. Her crew suffered 64 dead and 71 wounded. 5. USS Macomb, DD-458, was conducting radar picket duty on 3 May 1945, when at 18:29 she was targeted by a Ki-61 Tony fighter that crashed into the ship's number 3 5-inch gun. The plane's bomb passed through the ship's hull and out the other side of the ship, causing minimal damage, and all fires were soon extinguished. 7 men of Macomb's crew were killed and 14 wounded. 6. USS Forest, DD-461, was on patrol in Nakagusuku Bay on 26 May 1945, when at 22:49 she was hit by a Val kamikaze that struck her starboard side just below the main deck. The ship lost 5 dead and 13 wounded. Although down by the bow, Forrest was able to make it Karamaretto for temporary patch-ups and eventually back to the States for permanent repairs, where she would be when the war ended. USS Corey, DD-463, was preparing to bombard Utah Beach for Operation Overlord on 6 June 1944, when the plane which was supposed to deploy a covering smoke screen for Corey was shot down. Corey was exposed to German shore batteries that opened fire at 06:30 just when landing craft started for their attacks. Corey would at times approach within 1,000 yards of the beach, firing her guns at German pillboxes and emplacements. Soon after H-hour, the destroyer was struck amidships by several large-caliber shells. With the ship beginning to split in half, the crew abandoned the ship while still under fire from German guns. The Corey sank in 30 feet of water with her masts flying, the colors and tops of her stacks still visible. 24 of her crew went down with the ship, and another 60 were wounded. The hull of the ship remains near Utah Beach, protected as a war grave. USS Hobson, DD-464, was performing radar picket duty with USS Pringle, DD-477, and two gunboats on 16 April 1945, when the small group was attacked by kamikazes at 9:10. A single Val made a suicide run on Hobson from the starboard side. 5-inch shells obliterated the plane just a few dozen yards from short of the ship, but its 250 lb bomb penetrated the deck house. The bomb's explosion started fires in the gunnery, machine, and electrical workshops, and punched a hole through the deck over the forward engine room. 4 of her crew were killed and 6 wounded. The ship was quickly repaired and was back stateside for permanent work by 15 June 1945. USS Aaron Ward, DD-483, was operating with TF-67.4 of 5 cruisers and 8 destroyers on 13 November 1945, when the American ships encountered a Japanese surface task force including 2 battleships and 14 destroyers. At approximately 2:25, Aaron Ward was hit by more than 9 6-inch, 152 more 5-inch, 127 shells from the secondary battery of the battleship Kirishima, which knocked out her steering control. Unable to distinguish friend from foe in the darkness, she attempted to move out of the lines of fire, going dead in the water as the firing ending with her bow taking water around 2:35. The crew managed to get the engines fired up again and left the scene taking fire from the damaged Japanese battleship Hia. The ship would receive repairs at Pearl Harbor and return to service by 6 February 1943. On 7 June 1943, Aaron Ward was escorting LCTs to Guadalcanal when a Japanese air raid from the aircraft carrier Juneau found her. Several bombs landed on or near the Aaron Ward, causing extensive damage and flooding to the engine room, fire rooms, and electric rooms. Although her crew tried valiantly to save her, Aaron Ward was abandoned and sank at 21:35. She suffered 36 men killed and 59 were wounded. USS Buchanan, DD-484, was operating with TF-67.4 on 13 November 1942 in Iron Bottom Sound, when the American ships engaged a Japanese surface task force of 2 battleships and 14 destroyers at 1:48. The battle became a wild close-range gun fight with ships firing on friend and foe in the dark without positive identification. Buchanan was a victim of friendly fire, accidentally being struck by several shells later, identified as U.S.-made. The ship had to withdraw from the action to tend her damage. 5 men were killed during the battle. The Buchanan would return to service in February 1943. USS Duncan, DD-485, was operating with TF-64 of 4 cruisers and 5 destroyers during the night of 11-12 October 1942, aiming to ambush approaching Japanese warships that were intending to bombard U.S. Marine positions on Guadalcanal. Shortly before midnight, the American ships sprung their trap on the surprised Japanese, and a thunderous gun fight ensued. During the course of the action, Duncan independently charged the Japanese fleet and attempted to torpedo the Japanese heavy cruiser Furutaka but was unsuccessful. In turn, the heavy cruiser Kinugasa remained undamaged and fired her guns on Duncan, which was hit by numerous shells that ignited large fires and put the ship out of action with extensive damage. The crew fought fires and attempted to beach their ship on Savo Island, but when power failed, abandon ship was ordered. USS McCalla, DD-488, rescued 195 men from the shark-infested waters and attempted to tow Duncan away for salvage, but the battered ship sank 6 miles north of Savo Island. 81 crew were killed during the night's action. USS Glennon, DD-620, was providing fire support for troops pushing inland from the Normandy beaches on 8 June 1944, when at 8:30 the ship struck a mine along her stern, causing significant damage. As friendly ships were rescuing Glennon's crew off the ship, destroyer Escort Rich also struck several mines, sinking in 15 minutes. Glennon was towed in an attempt to salvage her, but on 9 June 1945, a German shore battery found its range on the ship and hit her with salvos of shells. The skeleton crew that had remained abandoned the Glennon, which floated until late 10 June 1944 when she sank. 25 men had been killed and another 38 were wounded during the action. USS Maddox, DD-622, was supporting the invasion of Sicily on 10 July 1943, performing anti-submarine duties alone some 16 miles off the coast when she was attacked by an Italian junker's Ju-88. A bomb struck the ship's aft magazines, which detonated in a tremendous explosion. The ship rolled over and sank in under 2 minutes, taking 202 crewmen down with her. 74 men were saved. USS Nelson, DD-623, was supporting the invasion of Normandy off Omaha Beach, when during the early morning hours of 13 June 1944, she made contact with an enemy E-boat at 1:05. After an exchange of fire, Nelson was struck by a torpedo on her stern just aft of turret No. 4. The explosion severed the ship and everything aft of turret No. 4, leaving her dead in the water. 24 men were killed and missing. Another 9 were seriously wounded. The destroyer was towed to Boston, MA, where she had a new stern installed. The Nelson returned to duty in November 1944. USS Harding, DD-625, was on radar picket duty off Okinawa on 16 April 1945, when at 9:58 she was attacked by 2 Vals off her starboard beam. The first was shot down, but the second plane, although afire and shedding large pieces, continued to come in. The plane crashed just short of its target in the water, showering debris and water over the ship. However, its bomb exploded underwater, tearing a huge gash into the side of the Harding. The ship began to quickly flood and listed severely to port. She was able to make it to Karama-Reto under her own power, suffering 22 dead and 10 seriously wounded. Harding would be repaired but missed the end of the war. USS Butler, DD-636, was performing radar picket duty off Okinawa on 25 May 1945 when she was attacked by a kamikaze. The enemy bogie took fire and missed, crashing into the ship, but the plane's bomb detonated underneath the Butler in the water, damaging her keel and killing 14 men. All steam and electric power was temporarily lost when the forward fire room was flooded. The battleship USS West Virginia provided cover for the Butler while the crew worked to get power working again. The ship was able to make Karama-Reto for temporary patch-ups and eventually back to the States for permanent repairs, arriving 26 Aug 45. USS Shubrick, DD-639, was acting as escort to the cruiser USS Savannah on the night of 4 Aug when she was attacked by Italian bombers. The enemy plane scored a direct hit amidships, which caused flooding and knocked out all power. 9 crewmen were killed and 20 wounded. The Shubrick was towed to Malta and was able to make the U.S. for permanent repairs on only 1 screw. After repairs and an overhaul, Shubrick was transferred to the Pacific Theater. On 29 May 1945, while performing radar picket duty, she was attacked by 2 kamikazes at 10, one of which was shot down. The other plane slammed into the starboard side, its 550 lb bomb blasting a 30-foot hole into the side of the ship. The fire set off ammunition and the depth charges, which amazingly put most of the fires out. 35 crewmen had been killed and another 25 wounded. Shubrick was towed back to Karama-Reto for repairs and made it back to the U.S. by 10 August. USS Beatty, DD-640, was performing convoy escort duty in the Mediterranean off the coast of Algeria during the evening of 6 November 1943, when her group of ships came under air attack from Luftwaffe aircraft. While observing attacks on nearby ships, the crew of Beatty spotted an incoming Junkers Ju-88 coming in low on the water. Although the ship fired on the enemy plane, it came within 500 yards and dropped a torpedo which struck the ship on her port side. The ship's back was broken by the explosion along with the loss of power and a 12-degree list. Although the crew battled valiantly to save their ship, Beatty could not be saved and broke in two halves, sinking at 23:05. 12 of her crew were killed and 6 seriously wounded. USS Turner, DD-648, was anchored not far from Ambrose Light on 3 January 1944, after a series of trips escorting convoys across the Atlantic, when suddenly at 6:50, several internal explosions in her ammunition storage area began to wreck the destroyer. The explosions continued to stagger the Turner until 7:50, when a large, violent explosion ripped the ship apart. She rolled over and sunk minutes afterwards, the tip of her bow bobbing in the water until 8:27. 138 crewmen went down with Turner. Fletcher class. USS Fletcher, DD-445, was bombarding Japanese strongholds defending Manila Bay on 14 February 1945, when the ship was hit by Japanese shore batteries at Los Cachinos Point, which killed 8 and wounded 3 crewmen. Damage was minimal, and fires were extinguished. Fletcher would remain on station continuing bombardment until the 17th, when she would make for minor repairs and continued her prestigious career. USS Radford, DD-446, was operating off Luzon in Mariveles Bay on 14 February 1945, maneuvering to take the mine destroyer USS La Valette in tow when the Radford itself struck a mine. The explosion killed 3 of the ship's crew. Repairs would send the Radford back stateside and would not return to the war zone. USS La Valette, DD-448, was escorting the torpedoed cruiser USS Chicago, CA-29, on their way out of the combat area near Rennell Island on 30 January 1943, when a wave of Japanese G-4M Betty torpedo bombers attacked the American ships. Although several were shot down, at least 6 bombers were able to launch their warheads. La Valette was hit by 1 torpedo in her forward engine room, causing severe damage. 22 men were killed. La Valette was taken in tow by the tugboat Navajo to Espiritu Santo for temporary repairs, then traveled to Mare Island Navy Yard. She rejoined the fleet on 6 August 1943. On 14 February 1945, while operating off Luzon in Mariveles Bay, the La Valette struck a mine that seriously damaged the ship and required her to be towed. 6 men were killed and 23 wounded. The ship was repaired and sent home to San Diego, California, where she was decommissioned after the war. USS Chevalier, DD-451, was operating with the destroyers USS O'Bannon and USS Selfridge, attempting to make a surprise interception of 9 Japanese destroyers, which were evacuating troops from Vela La Vela on 6 October 1943. After opening fire and blasting the Japanese destroyer Yugumo, the Americans continued on course to bear all guns and torpedoes on the enemy. Unfortunately, their course took them into the path of a salvo of torpedoes fired from the sinking Yugum, one of which struck Chevalier. Everything forward of the bridge was blown away from the ship by the explosion, and she was accidentally rammed from behind by the O'Bannon. Before giving the order to abandon ship, the crew of Chevalier fired a torpedo at a nearby Japanese destroyer, which exploded and sank soon afterwards. It was clear the ship could not be saved by 23:26, so the crew abandoned the Chevalier and was picked up by O'Bannon's boats. 54 men went down with her, and another 36 were seriously wounded. USS Softly, DD-465, was conducting anti-shipping operations between Kolombangara and Choiseul on the night of 1 October 1943, when she was attacked by Japanese bombers that hit her with several bombs. 2 crewmen were killed and 11 were wounded by the attacks. Damage was minimal and the ship remained on duty in the South Pacific. On 29 November 1944, Softly was performing anti-submarine patrols at the entrance to Leyte Gulf when she was hit by a kamikaze, causing considerable hull damage and killing 1 man. The ship would make repairs in the Admiralty Islands, then rejoin the fleet in time for the invasion of Lingian Gulf. USS Strong, DD-467, was operating with TF-18 on 5 July 1943, supporting landings on New Georgia in the Kula Gulf by bombarding Japanese positions near Baroko Harbor. Strong and Nicholas entered the harbor at 00:30 and began shelling when 10 minutes later, Strong was hit by a torpedo on her portside aft. The damage was clearly severe enough to prompt the captain of Chevalier to ram Strong to give the crew of Strong an escape route from their sinking ship. As Japanese shells from shore began to come in, Strong was left to sink, breaking in half before going down. 46 members of her crew were lost with the ship, but luckily 241 were saved. The torpedo which sank Strong was fired by the Japanese destroyer Nizuki at over 11 miles, 18 km, away. USS De Haven, DD-469, was escorting landing craft near Guadalcanal on 1 February 1943 when her group was attacked by 6 Japanese planes. 3 of the attackers were shot down, but the planes all released bombs together, scoring at least 3 hits and possibly 3 near misses. One of the bombs hit the bridge, killing the ship's commanding officer. The De Haven settled rapidly and sank 2 miles east of Savo Island, taking 167 lives of her crew down with her. Another 34 were seriously wounded. USS Bach, DD-470, was performing radar picket duty off Okinawa on 13 May 1945 when 13 Japanese aircraft attacked the area Bach was stationed. 1 plane made a run on the ship, its right wing hitting the No. 2 smokestack, spinning the plane around into the deck amidships. Its bomb exploded just before impact with the deck, causing extensive casualties and fires. All power and steam was lost, and the ship had to be towed back to Kuramaredo. 41 of her crew were killed and 36 wounded. USS Hutchins, DD-476, was performing close support operations off Okinawa on 27 April 1945 when the ship was attacked by a Japanese suicide boat. The fast, nimble little boat managed to sneak into the formation and detonated a charge alongside the hull of the Hutchins. A violent explosion rocked the ship, causing severe structural damage, but fortunately there were no casualties. Damage control was able to check flooding, and the Hutchins retired to make repairs at Kuramaredo and eventually the States. USS Pringle, DD-477, was escorting a resupply convoy to Mindoro on 30 December 1944 when she was targeted by a kamikaze. The enemy plane crashed into the ship's superstructure and a 40-gun mount. 11 men were killed and another 20 seriously wounded in the attack. Pringle would be repaired and back in service by February 1945. On 16 April 1945, Pringle was performing radar picket duty with USS Hobson, DD-464, and 2 gunboats off Okinawa when a small group of kamikazes attacked at 9:10. After shooting down several planes coming at her, a single D-3A Val crashed into the destroyer's bridge superstructure just abaft of the forward stack. The plane's bomb detonated in a violent explosion that buckled the Pringle's keel and effectively broke the ship in 2. The ship quickly sank in less than 6 minutes, taking 47 crewmen down with her. USS Stanley, DD-478, was performing radar picket duty off Okinawa on 12 April 1945 when she was targeted by 2 MXY-7 Oka rocket-powered kamikaze gliders. The first suicide rocket hit the starboard bow at speeds in excess of 500 mph, 800 km/h. But luckily the warhead punched through and exited out the port side of the ship, leaving a huge hole but only minor damage. A second Oka, or Baka bomb as the Americans called it, came in but missed the ship, taking off the Stanley's ensign as it went by before disintegrating in the ocean. 3 crewmen had been wounded by the attack, but fortunately, nobody was killed on board Stanley. USS Convoy, DD-508, was supporting landing operations on the Treasury Islands on 27 October 1943 when she came under attack from several Japanese dive bombers. Despite putting up a fierce storm of anti-aircraft fire downing 4 planes in the process, Convoy was suffered at least 2 hits on the main deck that killed 8 and wounded 10. Damage was extensive enough to require a tow to Florida Island and finally on her own to the States. Convoy returned to duty by March 1944. USS Aulick, DD-569, was performing anti-submarine patrols near the entrance to Leyte Gulf on 29 November 1944, when at 17:50 she was targeted by 6 Oscars. One of the attacking planes made it through the hailstorm of defensive fire and struck the bridge with its wing and spiraled into the No. 2 5-inch gun, starting several fires. 32 men had been killed and 64 wounded, but the ship was able to make it to San Pedro Bay, then the States for repairs. She returned to the war in March 1945. USS Renshaw, DD-499, was escorting landing craft through Surigao Strait into the Mindanao Sea on 21 February 1945, when she was targeted by a Japanese midget submarine that hit her with a torpedo. The ship was dead in the water, her forward engine room and aft fire room completely flooded and open to the sea. 19 men were killed and another 20 were seriously wounded. Despite the critical damage, Renshaw's crew was able to save the ship and made it to San Pedro Bay under her own power. The ship would make permanent repairs back in the States and played host to President Harry S. Truman for the Navy Day victory celebration in New York City on 27 October 1945. USS Claxton, DD-571, was bombarding Japanese positions protecting Bougainville Island on 4 February 1944, when the ship was struck by as many as 2, possibly 8-inch, shells which hit aft, wounding 15 men but otherwise causing minimal damage. The ship was sent back to the West Coast for repairs but returned to duty in April 1944. Off Leyte Gulf on 1 November 1944, Claxton was coming to the aid of stricken destroyer USS Abner Reed, which was sinking after several kamikaze strikes. A Japanese plane dove down out of the cloud cover and hit the water close aboard to the Claxton, its bomb detonating in the water. Although the ship suffered minor flooding, 5 dead and 23 wounded, Claxton was able to complete her mission rescuing over 187 of Abner Reed. The crew patched holes with mattresses and put in for repairs at Talcaban, and later Manus. She was back in action by January 45. USS Guest, DD-472, was patrolling off Hagushi Anchorage on 25 May 1945, when at 02:25, the ship was grazed by a single-engine plane which struck her mast and hit the water 50 yards off her starboard beam. No crew were wounded in this attack and damage was minor. USS Foote, DD-511, was engaged with a Japanese task force during the Battle of Empress Augusta Bay when approximately at 03:00, the ship was struck by a torpedo from the Japanese destroyer Samadare, which severed the stern from hull and killed 19 men. Another 17 were wounded. Foote was left adrift until the Japanese broke off contact. Afterwards, she was taken under tow to Purvis Bay for repairs. USS Spence, DD-512, was operating with Task Force 38 on 17 December 1944 in Philippine Sea when the U.S. ships were hit by Typhoon Cobra. During the savage storm, which at times had winds in excess of 140 miles per hour, Spence was helplessly tossed about in the huge waves. The Spence's power and pumps failed when seawater damaged equipment on board after the ship rolled 72 degrees to port. A few minutes later, around 11:00, the ship capsized after taking another massive wave hit. Of a crew of 336, only 24 were rescued. USS Sigsbee, DD-502, was operating radar picket duty off Okinawa on 14 April 1945 when her group of ships were targeted by kamikazes. A lone A-6M Dove on the Sigsbee too quickly for the main battery to engage. The suicide plane struck the ship's fantail, its bomb detonating a violent explosion which severed the ship after the No. 5.5-inch gun, causing flooding and fires. Sigsbee lost 22 men killed and 72 wounded. USS Brownson DD-518 was screening landings at Cape Gloucester, New Britain on 26 December 43, when at 14:42 she was hit by 2 bombs from a Val dive bomber which struck starboard of centerline near the No. 2 stack. The ship was split in half by an enormous explosion and sank at 14:59, taking 108 crew down with her. The rest of her crew was rescued by friendly ships. USS Abner Reed DD-526 was conducting anti-submarine duty off Kiska on 18 August 1943 when at 01:50 the ship struck a mine which triggered a violent explosion that severed the ship's stern at the aft 5/38 caliber gun. 71 men were killed and another 47 wounded. Abner Reed was taken under tow for repairs and returned to action by April 1944. While providing cover for forces landing on Leyte on 1 November 1944 at 13:41, Abner Reed was targeted by a kamikaze Val. Although a wing was shot off by the crew as it came in, the suicide plane crashed Abner Reed amidships, starting a large fire. The plane's bomb penetrated the deck, exploding in the engine room, and knocked out all water pressure to fight the fires. At 13:52, a violent internal explosion shook the ship. She began to sink stern first, rolling over and going under the waves at 14:15. Most of the crew was picked up by neighboring ships, but 22 crew members would go down with Abner Reed. USS Bennett, DD-473, was escorting landing ships off Okinawa on 7 April 1945 when the task force was attacked by a swarm of kamikazes. At 08:50 a D-3A Val chose Bennett as its victim, and despite heavy fire plowed into the ship's starboard side. The plane's bomb detonated inside the ship, killing 3 men outright and wounding 18 others. Damage was not severe and the ship was able to make for temporary repairs under her own power, then towed to Saipan by tug. 4 more crewmen would pass away from their wounds in the following days. USS Dolly, DD-519, was providing fire support for forces at Okinawa when on 28 April 1945 at 17:00, a raid of kamikazes targeted Dolly and her group of ships. The ship took an incoming Val under fire, causing the plane to miss the ship by a mere 75 feet. The plane's bomb detonated upon striking the water, spraying the ship with shrapnel, killing 3 and wounding another 16 of Dolly's crew. Damage was minimal, and days later the ship resumed her duty. USS Wadsworth, DD-516, was providing fire support to landings on Bougainville on 1 November 1943 during the Battle of Empress Augusta Bay when around 7:45 a group of 6 enemy dive bombers targeted Wadsworth and her sister ship bombarding the beach. Although all enemy bombs landed in water, 1 bomb missed the Wadsworth by less than 20 feet, spraying shrapnel across the deck. 2 of Wadsworth's sailors were killed, and another 9 were wounded by bomb fragments. 2 of the attacking planes were brought down. USS Ammon, DD-527, was supporting the landing at Leyte on 1 November 1944, when at 09:52 she was chosen as the final destination for a kamikaze twin-engine Francis. The flaming plane crashed into the 2 smoke stacks some 15 feet from the bridge crew before bouncing into the water, causing significant damage. Fires were quickly brought under control and the ship remained on station. 5 men were killed and another 21 wounded. USS Bullard, DD-660, was providing anti-aircraft support for the landings on Okinawa when at 13:57 on 11 April 1945, an enemy plane made a run on the destroyer. The suicide attacker barely missed striking the bridge, instead clipping the ship's antenna before tumbling into the sea. No casualties were reported and the ship remained on station. USS Isherwood DD-520 was operating off Okinawa on 22 April 1945, just west of Karamaredo, when at 17:25, her radar picked up incoming bogies. 3 enemy VALs approached the task force and made suicide dives on the American ships. One of the planes targeted Isherwood for destruction, coming in at 30 feet above the water off the starboard beam. The plane hit the ship's No. 3 gun mount, igniting a large fire. The fires engulfed the ship's depth charges were cooked off and detonated at 18:16, causing extensive damage to the aft of the ship. Isherwood was able to put fires out and make it Karamaredo for repairs under her own power. 42 men were killed and another 41 wounded.